So why Satan? Something I get asked a lot. So I decided that my first video on this channel would be answering the question, why Satan? When I first heard of the Satanic Temple back in 2015, the first thing that stood out to me was how they aligned with my personal ethics, their tenets specifically. My personal ethics had been evolving and changing at that point for a few years since I had finally left religion back in 2012. As anyone who has experienced religious trauma syndrome will tell you, one of the hardest things when it comes to rebuilding after that is finding new principles that prop up your life and your worldview. For me, it wasn't necessarily finding new ones. It was identifying what it is that I believed to be ethical. By the time I left religion, my ethics had not agreed with the moral code of Christianity in a long time. But when I discovered the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple, it blew my mind because they really spoke to what I believed to be moral. So what are the 7 tenets? 1. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures in accordance with reason. For me, this is kind of the basis of my ethics. If we're just treating living creatures, both human and other animals, with compassion and empathy as much as is reasonably possible, that kind of solves a lot of our issues we have. 2. The struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over the laws and institutions. This is pretty clear because laws and institutions aren't always just. Just because something is the law doesn't mean it is ethical. And because something is ethical doesn't mean that it is, okay in the eyes of the law. 3. One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. This is pretty huge for me, especially as a proponent for women's reproductive rights. 3 makes it pretty clear that we believe that your body is subject to your will alone, no one else's. I don't get to harvest your kidney without your consent just because I need it. Just like a fetus doesn't get to feed off a woman's body just because it needs it without her consent. I know that that can be a very difficult concept for anti-choicers to grasp, but that woman does have rights. She has rights over her body. And if she does not consent to a fetus using her body and potentially harming her body in the process, then that fetus doesn't have a right to it. 4. The freedoms of others should be respected, including the right to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego your own. Freedom is an incredibly powerful and noble goal. I am all about it. But your freedom ends where it encroaches on someone else's freedom. You have the freedom to shit wherever you want on your property, but you don't have the freedom to shit in the town's water supply because now you're encroaching on their freedom and their right to clean water. Also, the right to offend is there. Now, that's not to say that you're going to be free from the consequences of the offensive things you do and say, but you still have the right to say offensive things, to offend people. Use that wisely. 5. Beliefs should conform to our best scientific understanding of the world. We should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit our beliefs. Well, that just kind of leaves pretty much every other religion behind, doesn't it? Because just about every other religion is based in some sort of doctrine that was written anywhere between thousands of years ago and hundreds of years ago when we didn't have a very good scientific understanding of the world. So when these religious doctrines try to talk about anything scientific, they're wildly inaccurate. And then people who are trying to hold true to these doctrines have to then try to defend and use cognitive dissonance to try and make it make sense with our current scientific understanding of the world. This right here is to prevent the Satanic Temple and atheistic Satanists like myself from falling into that trap. Doctrine should conform to the best understanding of the world around you so that you don't get stuck in time, because mark my words, there's going to be more scientific discoveries that change how we view the world as time goes on. It is inevitable. 6. People are fallible. If we make a mistake, we should do our best to rectify it and resolve any harm that may have been caused. Because of fucking course we should. Like, I fuck up all the time, but whenever I do, I try my damnedest to make it right. If I'm sticking to the first tenet, then I tend to not be deliberately causing harm to people. But sometimes it doesn't matter if you're not trying to do it deliberately. Sometimes we get so focused on ourselves and our own shit that we're dealing with that we inevitably cause harm to others. When we do that, it is important that we try to make it right. We try to make the hurt parties see that we don't want to hurt them. People can be very forgiving, especially when you make the effort to restore that bridge with them. 7. Every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. Again, this leaves those other religions behind because the tenets that are here aren't set in stone. We're not stuck in time and space saying this is the one all be all of tenets. The idea here is the pursuit of compassion and wisdom and justice. And the idea is that idea should always prevail over whatever we have written or spoken to be our beliefs and our doctrines. The goal remains the same. Words evolve over time. Reason number 2. Rebellion against tyranny. So why not just adopt the moral code and be done with it? Why not just stick with the label of atheist? Isn't Satanism a little silly? Isn't Satanism just another denomination of Christianity? I mean, Satan is their guy. Well, for some of us, especially those of us who grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home, Satanism can be a very liberating experience. Let me explain. So I grew up in the 80s, in the height of the classic satanic panic. I say classic because we are still in a satanic panic today. I mean, look at everything from the QAnon conspiracy theories to every Christian moral panic. But my parents, shortly before getting married and then having me, had just become Christian and were in a fundamentalist church, and they were hard into the fundamentalism and whatever it is that preachers were shoving down their throats. They believed that everything was demonic, like everything from magical kids cartoons to sugary cereals to candy to martial arts. It was a lot. They kept a lot of that stuff like taboo. So of course, young me was like super fascinated with it. Like He-Man was considered like super evil and demonic. But so every time I saw like a He-Man toy on the shelf in the store or an advertisement for the cartoon, oh man, I was fascinated. It just seemed so extra cool because it was so taboo. My parents made it seem like there was some sort of mystical power behind it. So that, made young me like super like into the aesthetic of all things like high fantasy, magical, demonic, infernal. But unfortunately, it also made little kid me feel super guilty all the time because I was being taught that by simply wanting that stuff or being interested in it. But the mere fact that I thought that I wanted to watch a He-Man show was enough to be committing sin and inviting demons into my life. I also suffered from sleep paralysis. And every time it would happen, the hallucination that my brain would come up with would be some sort of demonic type figure based on images that I would be shown in church and in Sunday school of what demons look like. And so I was convinced, oh my God, because I like all this satanic demonic stuff, I'm now getting possessed by demons. I have demons attacking me at night. Scared the hell out of me. Well, eventually, when I became a teenager, my parents had mellowed out on the demonic stuff. So I was finally like catching up on a lot of old cartoons and movies and things and music and a lot of it was not as cool as I had hyped it up to be in my little kid brain. But, I was no longer so much afraid of that. The fascination for the aesthetic was there. I was a total goth kid as a teenager, being a teenager in the 90s. But one thing that did remain, though, was the guilt, and that's because of being raised in purity culture. Because of the teachings of purity culture, I was convinced I was hellbound for what I would later learn was perfectly normal teenage behavior. You see, when the doctrine teaches you that lustful thoughts is as bad as acting on them, and that acting on them will separate you from God, and you'll be cast out and thrown into hell, it forces a normal, healthy teenager to feel super guilty and shitty about the naturally occurring thoughts in their head. Because I was a horny teenager who had horny thoughts, I was convinced that I was evil and I was a piece of shit for that. I was still having night terrors, still believing that demons were tormenting me. So I was convinced that I wasn't good enough for God, that God didn't want me. Eventually, I started having suicidal thoughts. And at age 19, I attempted suicide. This got me removed from the army. The guilt had reached a boiling point, essentially. I felt like there was no reason to live anymore because I was just going to continue to disappoint God. And I felt like I was ready to accept my sentence in hell. It wasn't until I was about 30 that my belief in God had completely dissolved. But joining the atheist community wasn't quite enough to help me overcome the decades of trauma affecting me. And when I first heard Lucian Greaves speak about the Satanic Temple on Seth Andrews' The Thinking Atheist podcast, links below, great show, definitely check it out. And he said that they didn't believe in a literal Satan, but to them that Satan was a symbol of rebellion against ultimate tyranny. That right there struck a serious chord with me. I realized in that moment that for all those years as a Christian, I was submitting to the ultimate tyranny. I was letting an imaginary sky wizard rule over me in the worst possible way. Not only did he control my actions, but he policed my thoughts. I was willingly submitting to mind rape on a regular basis. I knew at this point that my tyranny was never really My tyrant was never really real to begin with, but I made the tyranny real in my life by believing he was. But now when I start to feel triggered by things from my past, by the horrible shit that I see religious people do, I can simply say, "Hail Satan," and suddenly they no longer have any power over me, and I feel a sense of control. There is no Satan. There is no Jehovah. But invoking Satan when the followers of Jehovah attack you and generally suck, it's very empowering. Today, I enjoy the aesthetic of Satanism and the liberation from religious trauma it brings me. I also enjoy supporting the Satanic Temple's fight for religious freedom for all in this country. Every day, this country is inching closer and closer to a theocracy. The Christian right has been passing law after law that is theocratic in nature, with the goal of turning this into a Christian nation instead of a pluralist nation that is for all religions. But the Satanic Temple is right there on the front lines, every day fighting battles in courts against these unjust laws. If you'd like to check them out, see what it is they're fighting, I'll provide the links below. If you're interested in fighting for religious freedom, check them out. Between the ethical code lining up and the power of a symbol that represents freedom and rebellion against tyranny, that is why Satan. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to write and subscribe, and Ave Satanis.